Once summer is over and the weather turns colder, there is a curious sight you might see when out and about in Denmark. Adults wearing ski suits as everyday clothing.
These ski suits, or Flyverdragter as we call them in Danish, are all-in-one outfits that you step into and zip up at the front. They're warm, they're water resistant, and they're very practical.
This practicality is part of the reason almost every parent in Denmark seems to have one for their toddler. However, unlike other forms of children's clothing, the ski suit has, in recent years, become a bit of a fashion statement for Danish adults.
In this episode, we speak with lifestyle fashion expert Julia Lahme about why Flyverdragter have become must-wear fashion in Denmark. We talk about the history of the suits, other retro trends coming back into fashion, and what this all says about Danish culture as a whole.
We're joined by Julia in the studio today. And so Julia, welcome.
Thank you.
So to get us started, can you explain to someone who's never seen a Flyverdragter before what it looks like?
Yes. It's basically a big down-filled jumpsuit which covers you from your ankles, all of your body, and then kind of closes at the neck. So it's like a parachuter's jumpsuit, and which is also why it's got its name. And if you were to translate it literally, it would be a pilot's suit.
Ah, okay. So I've been thinking ski suit.
No.
But actually it's a pilot suit.
Yes, it's a pilot's jumpsuit.
That sounds far cooler, doesn't
Yes,
it? I mean, this whole pilot. And often they also come in sort of army green. So there's some coolness over that.
And it's a very big part of Danish culture. And you're really a bad parent if your kids don't have at least one of them in Denmark.
So can you perhaps sort of take us back? So were these originally actual suits that pilots wore?
Yes.
And can you perhaps sort of talk about the initial usage of these suits?
Well, they're kind of zip-on suits, so they're supposedly easy to get off and on. In reality, they're really not, especially not on your toddlers. But they are supposed to shield you from the cold and the wet, so they also serve as windbreakers. And that was why they were used by pilots way back when the planes were still open. You would zip up in one of these suits.
Okay, so when you're sort of out flying your rickety old plane in the sky, this thing's going to keep you warm.
Exactly.
And I think what's really clever about it is you don't get a cold tummy because it's closed at the tummy, and otherwise, wind and weather could creep up under your top.
So and also they're very much similar to the boiler suits that we know from workwear from the 20s and 30s for especially men.
Okay.
Is it just me, or was this suit quite popular in the 80s too? Not to say too much about our age, Julia, but I think we were both quite young in the 80s.
We were.
But they were more like neon colored, maybe?
Yes, but have you seen the videos, the music video which Wham did for last Christmas? They're kind of wearing these all-body ski suits, and they're kind of similar to the Flyverdragter, though we don't really get them with shoulder pads, but they're kind of the same. So they look a bit like ski suits, but the thing is that a real Flyverdragter, a Danish one, needs to have far more downs in them and be a little bit more chunky.
So by down, this is sort of like padding, like feather.
Yes.
Is it the same down, when you talk about duvets? And
you say, it's the same.
It's that sort of concept.
It's the same.
So it's basically just like a big duvet that you've got zipped all over you.
It is. If it's in a good quality for adults anyway, it will be duck feathers. And if it's for children, mostly it will be thinsulate padding.
So were these like manufactured in Denmark? Was there like a Flyverdragter factory?
I do believe so, yes. Now everything, of course, has moved to the other side of the world. But initially, yes, they were manufactured in Denmark, especially for some brands.
And what was the story about the recent comeback? Because there has been a comeback. There were quite a few years where you'd never want to be seen in a Flyverdragter as an adult. It would have seemed very childish. It would have seemed odd, maybe a little bit 80s-like, because we do maybe remember our ski suits from back then.
Yes, well, it's a bit of a long story, and it has a lot of interesting storylines to it. So first of all, these suits were also worn in Scandinavia in a less trendy fashion in the 60s and 70s by working men, builders, and people working with their hands out in the open air. So they would wear some Kansas, they were called, a brand called Kansas. They would do kind of soft, padded, very warm boiler suits and send people out working in them. And they kind of came back into fashion approximately 10 years ago. And they were picked up by two guys who have a shop on Bornholm, which is called Roger, this shop. And they started selling them. And they kind of became the cool fashion insiders, laid back winter wear. Alongside with that trend, which was most definitely a micro trend, came the hipster movement, where we saw how you were supposed to live your whole life in the city, where we ended the discussion if it was okay to actually raise children in the city, which was a big discussion at that time, and where we started to have a very different relationship with coffee. So the whole lifestyle changed, and especially in the big cities like Berlin and Copenhagen. And their fashion became something which was, in Copenhagen anyway, and in many other big Danish cities, fashion became something that you were not supposed to be very much into. You had to look a little bit cool, you had to look a bit worn, you had to look a little bit less glamorous than I'd like to myself.
Yeah, a bit like you don't care. You're just like, I'm just throwing this on.
And yet you spend 2 hours getting yourself ready to look like you didn't care.
Kind of, if you were a man, growing your beard, and if you're a woman, kind of letting your hair hang in a very special, uncontrolled way, very controlled. But you kind of had a fashion movement which urged everybody to look unplanned, but even though a bit ready for the outdoors. So there, the fashion trend of looking laid back really came into flourish in a new and very exciting way. And so Flyverdragter made an entrance on the streets of Copenhagen first 7 or 8 years ago. And from then on, it's just been growing as an adult thing.
And then I suppose Corona really tipped it over the edge, because suddenly we had time to go for walks during our work hours. We wanted to be able to maybe enjoy the extra time we had with the children. They needed to be out going for walks with dogs and so on. There was all of this opportunity.
Yes.
But you obviously want to do that in a comfortable fashion. You're now not out there to flash yourself too much when you're at home.
No, but also all of us got really sick of the weather at the same time, because nobody could travel. And we were so tired of feeling cold and wet all the time. And the Danish winters are cold and wet. So it was a natural thing that people would search towards these Flyverdragter. But mostly they were actually cool, and still are.
It's interesting that you're saying that it actually did enter Denmark not last year or the year before, but it's about 5-7 years ago. I was taking my child to football training at that time. And, obviously we're very hardy in Denmark. So, it might be snowing, there might be ice everywhere, but you still take your kids to football training outside.
Yes, of course.
I remember sort of braving through the snow and having to stand out there. And the kids, they stay relatively warm because they run around. But the mothers and fathers cheering on the side get really, really cold. And the first time I saw one of these Flyverdragter on adults was one of these army green ones, probably from Roger, the shop you mentioned. And it was absolutely phenomenal seeing it on this mother, who was obviously super trendy and knew exactly, I'm going to have to stand here for 3 hours. I'm going to have to be warm, but I still want to look cool.
Yes.
And she'd managed to get one of these ones. And we were so envious.
Yes. But it's kind of a choice. At the beginning, when the Flyverdragts came to Denmark again, it was a bit of a choice whether to stay warm or be cool, because they weren't that cool in the beginning. They were big, they were baggy. Now they're actually more shapely, they are more figure hugging, and you can't hide very much in them. You look a little bit like Alexis if you pull it off right.
Yeah. Actually, Sam and we got really, really cool matching Flyverdragter.
Yes.
We're very lucky. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but they're from a company called the Dalset.
Yes,
and
lovely.
They are beautiful. They really do great things for a lady's figure.
It seems quite common now for trendy women such as yourselves, I imagine, to be walking down the streets in Copenhagen and to really pull it off.
Yeah.
I did feel a bit of nervousness about stepping out as a guy in this, just because it's less of a common sight. Then I step out and suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is fantastic.
Yes, you don't want to take it off.
It is so good.
Yes.
And so I'm sort of now quite happily strutting around in Copenhagen wearing this thing.
My husband and I got some really cheap ones, like these Kansas workwear, which we wear in the winter. And we have unfortunately ended up buying the same colors, and we kind of look. It looks like you're trying to prove something to nature itself by wearing these.
Remember, it's like the 80s where you had these tracksuits,
Exactly.
and then you'd have matching husband and wife, and then you'd be out there walking in nature together, matching each other. Now it's just it's Flyverdragter instead that we match. But I thought you looked fantastic in yours actually, and it was quite masculine. This one from the doll set.
It was quite good, wasn't it? I don't know, they definitely were quite, as you said, fitting. So definitely make you look a bit more like the Michelin Man.
You need to put a lot into construction when it comes to adults, because those for children are basically just a big blob with arms and legs in it. But for adults, you need to be able to move, because if you don't really feel like you're able to move in them and you can't really lift your arms or carry a bag, you won't use it.
Yeah. So, I mean, how difficult is it to actually construct one of these things?
It's really difficult because it has multiple layers in it, and you need to take movement into to accord, because you can't do it in stretchy fabric. So the fabric is kind of fixed, and normally when we do active wear, it's in stretchable fabric. But this is thought as active wear and constructed like active wear, but never in a stretchy fabric. So it's really difficult, and you need to buy yours from an expert.
Yeah, I think they're done really well. And I think you had a bit more space in yours than I had. I mean, men always get the most comfortable wear.
Yes, and
I don't know what it is.
Pockets too.
Yeah, exactly.
But I sort of get Flyverdragter in that practical sense. So I'm just a bit curious about this point you said a while ago about this trend, which was suddenly we've gone from fashion being something where you're like put together well, you look your best, to suddenly being a bit rougher.
Yes.
You seem to say it was something to do with this idea of you can live in the city or you can sort of be hipster. Can you sort of expand on that a bit?
Yes. Well, and I can give you a very clear example of it. If you and I were to walk into a bar, I would look at Nørrebro, for instance, I would look like I came straight out of Dollars or Dallas in the 80s compared to the girls in their 20s and 30s sitting there. Makeup is not really used anymore. Hair needs to be tousled and a little bit random. You need to wear pared down clothing in order to fit in seamlessly in some cultural settings in Denmark, especially in the intellectual ones. So we have gone from a fashion which was all in with everything that glitters to a kind of normative, not normcore, but normative way of paring yourself down to show that you care about other things than the materialistic things, and that you are very secure in your femininity or masculinity.
Interesting. So the broader trend there is to demonstrate that you don't care about material things.
Yes, but it's just one trend among many.
Yeah, because that's interesting with the Flyverdragter. I was actually just thinking before, older people, younger people, do they wear them? Or is it something that is like from age 30 plus till age 50 minus? Who wear these Flyverdragter? I feel I see them everywhere, but do we?
Yes, we do see them everywhere. And it's actually not a specific demographic. It's actually everyone in Denmark who doesn't want to freeze their ass off during winter. So it's basically all of us. It doesn't have anything to do with age.
So that one bridges everything. I think that's amazing, because what other items, as you say, that is very demographically based with the other trends. But here we can all agree on the fact that we want to stay warm. Yes. We want to have the freedom to cycle and be comfortable. And we want to be able to practically be able to enjoy whatever weather there is in Denmark.
Yes, and we do have a firm belief in Denmark that the weather is never the problem. And that's so annoying when people say that, because it's kind of something you're raised on as a child in Denmark. It's not the weather that's the problem. You'll always hear that said any day of the week when something cold hits you.
Yeah, we have that saying that not bad weather, just bad clothing, don't we? That you've probably heard a lot as well.
Exactly.
Sam.
Yeah.
Coming from England, where it's always a little bit warmer than
Slightly
in Denmark.
Warmer,
but the thing is, in Denmark or in the UK, actually, you treat the weather differently, and you treat your clothing differently. You have a different relationship between you and the weather and the clothes you wear. So if we were to go to England and into a big city in winter, you would still see girls without tights, but in knee-length skirts. You'd never see that in Denmark. So we do feel that the weather is something we need to be in a relationship with, whereas in the UK you feel a little bit more like the weather is something you should overcome. You win at getting dressed in the morning. The weather doesn't decide a lot. In Denmark, we accept that the weather is what it is.
And then you sort of adapt
very
way.
much more.
I'd never thought of it that way.
No, but you
Oh my
can't.
gosh.
You rebel against the weather in the UK. We don't. We
Yeah, and
accept
also
it.
kids stay inside. I remember that actually.
Yes.
You see that in Africa and other parts of the world as well. If it's just the tiniest drizzle, okay, it's raining, so today we stay inside. In Denmark, forget about it. The children go out and they're there for quite a few hours, and it
Yes.
doesn't matter what weather it is. And therefore, you have the clothes for it to make it possible. So all of the items that we have for children here in Denmark are not available in the UK. In fact, my UK friends, when they come to visit, I give them some of this. They're like, wow, this is amazing. They love Scandinavian outdoor clothes for their
Yes.
kids, because actually it's really handy for playgrounds and that.
It is, but we don't have the acceptance of weather as a hindrance in Denmark. It is not socially or culturally allowed to be. So we kind of decide how our relationship is with the weather. We don't wait for it to improve because we know it probably never will. And we can't stay indoors 9 months in a row.
Exactly. We would always be indoor if we didn't just get on with it.
Exactly.
I'm curious, are there other cultures that have this similar relationship to the weather as
Yes.
Denmark? Is it a Scandinavian thing?
It's very much a Scandinavian thing. And if you look at the northernmost part of Germany, they speak about Scandinavian child rearing as the new and very modern way to do it. So it's kind of spreading a little bit, also due to the fact that we're all discussing climate very much more, and that we are discussing how to be in touch with nature on a different scale. But it's also a sign of living in a welfare state, also in a true welfare
Really?
state. Yes, because we all have the expectation that children should be well dressed when they're going out into the weather. It's not about the brand or how your clothes look. But if you have a child and you don't have the money enough to buy it a Flyverdragter, you'll just go down to the council and they'll help you instantly. It's no questions asked. So it's, if you live in the UK, for instance, and your child doesn't have enough clothes to play outside in bad weather, you're not as likely to get the help immediately as you would be in Denmark.
Interesting. So it's like this universal right
Yes.
for kids to play.
Yes.
And that goes through to the provision of Flyverdragter.
Yes. It's a universal right for a child to be able to sleep outside in its stroller until it's 2 or 3 years old. You're giving your kids the right to nap outside. So you do need a stroller because every child needs to sleep outside.
Or it's actually these big prams, aren't they?
Yes,
They're these
prams,
humongous
yes.
prams that we put them in outside, and we really believe in fresh air. In
Yes.
most countries, that would basically be seen as child abuse.
Yes.
Whereas in Denmark, it's like giving the children the right to fresh air.
Yes. And I think it's the kind of, maybe I'm a bit wrong here, but I think it's up until it's minus 10 degrees Celsius, you should let your child have at least one nap outside a day.
It sounds like you're reading from a list. Like, is this these are actually like laws that are written?
No, it's not laws that are written,
Okay.
but it's what we regard as common sense.
Okay.
You need to be weather hardened. You're supposed
Yeah.
to live here. You need to be able to take in the weather. And also we believe that it kills germs, don't we?
I believe so, yes. My children were brought up abroad, so I came back with the last one who did get a chance to sleep out in the extremely cold Scandinavian weather. But I was so pleased we could do that. But I mean, I do remember that there were other issues and concerns. For example, in the UK and in South Africa, they had the issue of rats.
Yes.
You did not want to put your kid out there and find a rat in the pram.
Of
So,
course
and
not.
in Denmark, we are so lucky that
Yes.
it's very clean, it's very safe. Also from you don't expect someone to run off with your child in the pram perspective. So therefore, there's this whole trust culture that we know that we can put our kids out there, they'll get some fresh air, they'll sleep well. And yes, it will probably kill some germs as well.
Yes, and it dominates our lives. For instance, my son, who is now 10, he was 9 during the whole Corona business. Every afternoon he goes to what we call a club, and the rooms were too small to let the children stay inside. So he was outside all winter in drizzling rain. He just they didn't have as much as a small room to go into in the afternoon. They were outside every afternoon from when school ended until being picked up in the
Oh
afternoon.
gosh, and he was wearing a Flyverdragter the
Of
whole
course
time.
he was.
So he was in warm clothes.
Yes.
I mean, and that's the thing, that's our mentality, and the kindergartens are the same. You
I
spend
don't see a
lot of
problem in it.
I think it's wonderful.
Yes.
I mean, actually, they really use their hands, and sooner enough they will get onto the whole gaming thing. So the more time they spend outside, also working their physique and collaborating around things,
Yes.
the better.
It seems I never really viewed these Flyverdragter as like a ticket to go outside and be able to explore the world.
It is.
I'd just never really sort of got that. That's a real key value in it, is that it allows you all year to go out and sort of play in nature. I just sort of thought of it as like a thing to keep you warm. But actually, you're right. It then allows you to play outside and spend 4 months in drizzly weather at your club.
Exactly,
Yeah.
8, 9. Yes.
But I'm
Yeah.
curious about the Flyverdragter in other countries, because now we've been quite insular over the last few years because of Corona. We've all been stuck in our own little environments. But how is Flyverdragter doing in other parts of the world? Do we see a trend?
We see it slowly emerging, but especially led on by Danish brand. We have a Danish brand called Hunkøn, who are producing these wonderful Flyverdragter because they're in multiple colors and patterns. So they do them every year. We have Ganni, a leading Danish fashion brand, who has also for seasons produced them. We have Mads Nørgaard, which is an excellent Danish fashion brand as well, which does very simple designs, and they have done Flyverdragter, and I actually used to own the one, but my oldest one nicked it from me, so now it's his, and it's almost worn out. But it's we have these brands which are sold abroad, which are taking the trend with them.
So is Denmark leading the way in Flyverdragter?
Maybe for grown-ups, yes. We do have Swedish brands as well who have dabbled in it, but actually in Denmark we're pretty forward when it comes to Flyverdragter. Yes.
And is it? I mean, if you look at sort of the total addressable market for this, like in terms of other countries where this is going to be useful, yes. I assume that sort of countries near the equator where it's quite warm and they don't have long winters won't be as applicable. I mean, are you basically just sort of looking at Denmark and looking at the same latitude? So maybe it's like Canada,
yes.
Northern Europe, the Baltics,
yes,
etc.
The Baltics, but also the Netherlands, which are actually big markets for Danish fashion. For years we have had a big impact on the Netherlands fashion-wise.
So obviously you are also a trend expert, Julia. And what are you seeing, apart from the Flyverdragter, happening right now?
In Denmark.
In Denmark, and is there somewhere where we inspire further?
Yes, well, one thing which is a bit funny is the kind of knitted baklava hood, which you will see in Copenhagen and in Denmark right now, which actually we saw here last year. We call it the Anna and Lotte hue, which is a Danish children's television show where one of the puppets looked like it was wearing kind of a snoot. And that's what we are wearing, or many women are wearing right now. But it has actually sprung. I'm not sure if it's directly from Denmark, but now you find it in the big collections at Miu Miu and Prada. They've done it for this winter as well. But all the Danish girls were knitting it last year already.
And why is that suddenly popular?
It's really ugly. I can't tell you. It kind of messes up your hair. But most of all, it keeps you warm.
It's again convenient and practical,
yes,
isn't it?
No, we're actually looking, just to sound a little bit more professional, but we're looking at some trends which are desexualizing right now. So we're looking at desexualizing trends which do not serve the purpose of looking attractive to the opposite sex or to anybody who would have a romantic interest in you, but which are all about kind of drawing up a bit of a distance between you and potential suitors, no matter if you're a man or a woman. But we do see these trends right now, and they're a natural consequence of what is happening in the gender discussion debate right now, and how we are all dealing with our genders in a new and different way. So we will see these microtrends the next 5 or 10 years, which are actually serving a desexualizing purpose, where you don't want to look as if you're trying too hard. And you don't want to look too engaging, and you don't want to look like an open invitation.
And I think it's also interesting what you were mentioning about the knitting, because knitting has become huge. I think it's across the world, but particularly in Denmark.
Yes.
And it's also sort of a way of going back to sort of those homely values, sort of the wholesomeness of not being on social media all the time, but actually doing something with your hands and being a little bit more creative with yourself.
Yes. And we saw that during lockdown, and we saw it. We've seen it continue. It started with the baking bread, and the big cult of the sourdough in Denmark, where we were to exchange living gifts by giving each other pieces of our sourdough and naming it. And we did that, and people got a dog, and they keep on knitting. So it's kind of, if you don't have a baby, a sourdough, or a new dog, what have you actually been doing with your lockdown, right?
Yeah.
So now you can prove your new knitting skills.
And is there anything at all about longing for childhood or something like this Anna Lodder thing? This is back from childhood. Is there a sense of like wanting to regress back into your childhood, or is that just?
I don't see it there. Maybe there always will be, especially around Christmas, but I don't see it as a consequence of longing back and to be part of a nostalgic trip down memory lane. We see that in other things. We see that in comfort food, for instance, which has actually become a thing in Copenhagen and the surrounding area as well. You can now buy frikadeller at the most fancy cafes. You can buy tarteletter at the most fancy cafes on Vesterbro.
And this is sort of like cozy food that you'd have when you were younger. And now it's sort of back in these
80s classic. Yes.
Yeah, we'd also call it mormormad, which means grandmother food.
Yeah.
So it's all your grandmother's favorites, and I suppose that is sort of diving into that comfortable space that's from your childhood.
One thing which seems to have come back into fashion, which honestly perplexes me, is the mullet.
The mullet.
Yes.
The hair.
Yes.
What's going on there?
Well, it's all business in the front and all party in the back. No, the thing that's going on is that we have these big trend cycles, and we are just moving through the end of the 90s, if you notice it.
Mm-hmm.
Silk slips for the girls, cut on the bias with a t-shirt underneath. Platform trainers. We're just finishing the rest of the 90s. So now the first movers are actually moving back to the beginning of the 80s.
Oh, again, wait, they're going back to the 80s again?
Yes,
they're not
they
going
are.
on to the 2000s?
No, it's too early.
Okay.
But you also see it in fashion right now with the shoulder pads for both men and women.
Oh no, are they coming back?
Yes, they are here already. They've been here for about a year. It's just
actually, you're
yes,
right.
yes. So, and that is of course also a question of what happened in the past year. Well, Corona happened, and we all had to pull ourselves a little bit together, and now we need to show strength. Fashion needs to stay current, so it needs to emulate emotions, and that's what it does through the shoulder pads and through the mullet, which also signifies a time where fun was to be had. And what we're looking for right now is fun. So you also see it in the other more glamorous side of fashion, where it's all feathers and sparkles and high heels and glittering boots. And
what is it? They said that after was it the Roaring 20s, the 1920s, that came after the First World War and the Spanish flu.
Yes.
And suddenly there was this huge stored up, okay, we need to go out and have fun.
Yes.
And that was the 1920s. And I think they're saying the 2020s will be something similar.
And it already is.
Yeah.
But when we look at trends, we can't just see one trend emerging. We always see 10 or 20 fashion trends which kind of emerge and explode at the same time. So you need to choose your tribe. I think you would look great in 80s shoulders and a mullet.
You reckon?
Yes, I
A
think
mullet?
so.
Oh, I'm not sure about a mullet.
We're gonna do the mullet.
Oh, don't say that, Julia.
Or
Oh, no.
a light perm.
A light perm. A light
yes.
perm.
Yes,
oh my
like
gosh.
some curls
I
in the
don't know.
front and then all straight in the back.
Gosh, we'll have to see. Oh.
Let's see
I
in
don't
1
know.
year. You'll wear it proudly, I'm sure.
We'll meet up next year, and then you'll be like, "Oh no, forget that, Sam. The perm's out of fashion.
And
We're going to have to get you
the
something
next
else."
time the 90s come around again, you and I, Josefine, we could have the barbed wire on the upper arm tattooed.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm up for it. We'll go together, hey?
What was that signifying? The barbed wire tattoo.
Well, that was explosive and strong femininity.
Okay.
And a little bit Pamela Anderson, who personified that and even had the tattoo as well.
Yeah, it's sort of where the brute, sort of the masculine meets the ultra feminine, isn't
Exactly.
it?
Yes. Yeah. So we also need bigger boobs. We'll have to work on that. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Julia, when Foreigners come to Denmark.
Yes.
What do you think fashion-wise? Because I know you've lived abroad for quite a few years. So you understand sort of also how do people experience Denmark when they come here? Is there sort of some fashion you believe stand more out where we are different?
Yes. The leading Danish fashion brands right now have a special high-quality spin on function and trend. So we do not in Denmark produce clothes which cannot be worn and doesn't serve a purpose. So it's not frivolous, but it's more functional fashion, which
more
we
minimalist
produce.
in a way as well, maybe.
Yes,
or
but still embellished and still with a lot of details, but it needs to serve a purpose. And that's also why the Flyverdragter, of course, needs to come from Denmark. And it mirrors a little bit how we have treated furniture design for years and years and generations, which is it needs to be beautiful, but it also needs to have a function. So when looking at Danish fashion from an external point of view, you'd say, well, it's not overly expensive. It can all be washed. It is well cut. And you move in it, and it has been beautifully made. So that's kind of the things you would notice about Danish fashion right now.
There is one thing I remember because I was based in Africa for quite a few years,
Yes.
and actually Sam has been too. And it's very colorful there. And
Yes.
I remember I had my kids there, and there it was very much about you put your children in colorful clothes because they're children.
Yes.
You know, you celebrate childhood. And I would have my mother visit and Danish friends, and they'd all bring these sort of creamy colors, very subdued colors. And I actually reacted a bit to it because I felt that's really sad. Why should I put my children in this boring clothes? But obviously that's now I'm back in Denmark. I've been here for 5-6 years. I'm like, yeah, it's really stylish. It's beautiful. It's elegant. But there is a bit of a clash there actually between
Yes.
these two cultures.
Yes, very much so. And obviously we don't have a language for the colors, not meaning that we don't know the names of the colors, but we're not used to communicating in colors in Denmark or in most of Scandinavia actually. So we communicate in a bit different way, and we send our signals more subtly. And children's wear, the trend has been here for I think a decade that exclusive children's wear is made of more subdued colors. And it's never really gone mainstream. It's kind of the more exclusive children's wear. The mainstream children's wear is still very much in color.
And what's that? I'm curious about this point about communicating with color.
Yes.
So what is it? Yeah. What does that mean?
You can't talk about anything in Denmark without mentioning the Jantelov, which I'm sure you know.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've explained to your listeners a dozen times already. But you're not really allowed to stand out.
Mm.
So if you do stand out a lot with what you're wearing, it's going to be a talking point.
And you don't want to draw that attention.
Not necessarily.
You want to be part of the group.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you might come across as antisocial in Danish culture.
Yes. And also because we have this very egalitarian society, you're not supposed to look more expensive than other people.
Okay, and the worry is that if you were suddenly wearing some bright, or you put your kid in some bright, colourful clothes, that puts attention to them, but it becomes a talking point.
Well, not as much for the children, more for the adults. Yes, and
Yet it does reflect a bit, because I suppose always adult fashion also reflects on the children. So you do find that there's less of the color.
Yes.
Where you really turn up the color in many other countries.
Yes.
For the children. You do that less so in Denmark. But I'm actually curious because you actually also work with Africa.
Yes.
With Zambia. So you have also had your insight into that culture and probably how they dress differently from what we're used to in many other places.
Yes, and it is a challenge. The challenge being that I run a project in Zambia called Musali. We have one in India as well, actually. But in Zambia, we have a group of women who are all taking care of their own children, but also taking care of other women's children. There's a big number of orphans in Zambia. Actually, 1 million children are orphans due to the HIV epidemic. So we produce handicrafts, jewelry, purses with the ladies in Zambia, and their color choices are sometimes so of the possibility of what any Danish woman would wear that we are not able to sell it, and we have to return it to Zambia. So we have now figured out how to actually create a color palette that's wearable for Danish women. But it has been quite a journey.
And how does that look? Does that basically just mean...
It means, for instance, we do like colors, but green and orange is not a favorable...
can't clash.
Doesn't work on any Danish woman. And we don't do black and red together either, which they would prefer as prime color combination in Zambia.
So what are some good Danish color combos in this way?
Blue, purple, pink.
Blue, purple, pink.
Yes, a little bit of green.
That totally makes sense. I'd love
Yes.
one of those.
Yes.
I need to go and look at the range. But it's also interesting because I suppose in terms of patterns, we are quite happy with patterns, but not within too many colors. So either you go with a bright color, or otherwise you go with a bright pattern, but not that many colors.
Exactly.
Imagine.
Yes. It needs to be a little bit pared down, but also look at our skin tones. Look at our skin tones in November. It just doesn't work with bright orange and yellow in November for most of us.
Yeah, I remember going shopping in Africa, and you'd go into these wonderful shops with beautiful fashion, like really colorful, gorgeous patterns and so on. And I'd put these things on and they'd be like, it's really amazing. It looks beautiful, because I'd be looking at the dress. But I was sort of a bit like, this dress is wearing me. I'm not wearing that dress.
Exactly.
So, and that's the thing about our skin tone. It just doesn't work well.
No.
People who are listening, where can they find out more about you and your work?
Well, they can go to my company website, which is lahme.dk, or they can visit me at my Instagram.
Oh, go on, what's your Instagram handle?
It's Lahme Kommunikation.
But we're looking here at Julia, and she's very classy looking, but she's wearing color. I would actually call your trousers purple.
Yes.
And a leopard print belt.
Yes.
And lots of beautiful jewelry.
Yeah. You're really putting
Really
it
cool.
off. You're really putting it off. I'm not, Julia is definitely in the market. This is her job, is to tell people what they look good. How to look good. Yeah.
Certainly. I hope for some advice
Yeah.
after this.
You don't need it.
Thanks to everyone who has helped in the creation of the episode, including Andreas Poulsen, Jack Jørn, Tevin Sudi, and Mia Dwelling.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. We are still early in our journey of resolving cultural confusion in Denmark, and would love for you to join us by subscribing to our show on your podcast app. If you like this episode, please do consider telling your friends about it. And you can also head over to whatthedenmark.com to receive our newsletter or find us on Instagram. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Josefine Folkvarts.
And I'm Sam Floyd. So to get us started, can you explain to someone who's never seen a Flyverdragter before what it looks like?
Yes. It's basically...
Hi, vi starter.
I'll do it again. Okay, do it again.
Welcome.
Just pick up.
Cool.